Hello, I'm Paul French, director of the Southern Oregon Repertory Singers, and today is November 21st, just a few days before Thanksgiving. And we at Repertory Singers are grateful for our patrons and our audience. Thank you all for supporting us even through this very strange time we're in. This is part of our Glimpses of Beauty video clips where we interview members of the choir, and I am I'm grateful to all of the members of the choir. They make the beauty, and I like to say I'm the prism for their beauty. Uh, and one of the most beautiful would be Don Matthews, who's my guest today. And welcome, Don.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Paul. I don't consider myself beautiful, so I have pandemic hair. So it's kind of like one of those things where I spend a lot of time thinking about what I could possibly wear so that I don't look like a scraggly old guy. But you can only do so much.
Well, uh, Don, you are probably the most recognizable voice in the entire Rogue Valley. So in a way, it seems funny to chat with you about your life, but people have been hearing you on the radio and seeing you in plays and performing both as a soloist and with repertory singers for years. But I thought this would be fun for our patrons to learn a little bit more about yourself. So how how tell me about your journey in music. How did it start?
Well, I'm grateful, first of all, that there may be someone who can edit this, but it started with me having a crush on a girl. It always starts that way.
Ah,
Uh,
like an opera.
yeah, and I had sung when I was in grade school. I went to a Catholic grade school and we sang every day. But when my voice changed, I kind of couldn't deal with the frog sounds that I was making. And then when I was in high school, I was asked by a girl I had a crush on to run the spotlight for this variety show. And I said, sure. And while I was fooling around on the stage, the choir director heard me speaking and said, you have a really nice speaking voice. Have you ever thought about singing? And I said, well, I've sung a little bit. And so he took me into his studio and he played some scales and he said, and he had a song there. I think it was If Ever I Would Leave You, unbelievably, believe it or not. And can you sing this? And I said, sure. And he literally marched me down to the office after that and talked to the guidance counselor and said, I want this boy in my choir, make that happen.
Yeah, that sounds like a typical choir director. That's what we do, out
Yeah.
trolling for talented men. That's funny.
And so I got involved in that. And then I went to Interlochen All-State Choir during the summers when I was in high school. And that's when I really got turned on to great classical music to sing. I remember we sang the Bach cantata.
Ich habe genug.
The beat number 4, Christlagen Todesbanden.
Right.
And I just fell in love with that. And we did Benjamin Britten, Rejoice in the Lamb. And I was completely I came home and I announced to my dad as a 15-year-old, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Whoa,
And
at 15?
yeah, and you know what he said? Well, all parents will say this. Yeah, but what are you going to do for a living? What's your job going to be, right?
When you study music history, as I have, almost every parent said that to all the famous composers. They all said, no, don't do it.
Most of them went to law school.
Oh yeah, medicine or law, come on.
Yeah, get a job.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing that, and that sort of got me into singing in choral music. And then when I was in college, I went to Eastern Michigan University. I couldn't read music as a high school. I didn't learn how to read music. I just sort of heard by ear. And so when I tried to go to the University of Michigan, I failed miserably the entrance exam. And when they asked me, about that, I said, well, I figured you'd teach me how to read music. And they said, yeah, no, we don't have time for that. So I went to a smaller state school called Eastern Michigan University, which is just down the road, which was the best decision I ever made because it was a smaller school. It was much more focused on, you could do a variety of things. You could be in theater and be in music. And my sophomore year, 1976, we went to England, Ireland, and Wales on a 5-week tour. And that was another formative moment. I was so loved the experience of visiting, first of all, being out of the country for the first time and singing sometimes 3 concerts a day. We sang 60 some concerts over that period of time. And I'll just highlight one memory. I remember standing, I believe it was in Salisbury Cathedral, singing Ave Verum Corpus of William Byrd. And being the tall fellow that I am, I was in the middle of the back row, and we finished singing and heard the sound kind of go out in this long delay. And I looked up and I was standing right underneath the paraclete that is at the center of the cross in the middle of that cathedral. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how lucky I was.
What a great story. And so then what did you do next?
Well, I continued to study voice and started to sing some solo works, and wanted to go to grad school to study voice. I was actually doing some conducting at the same time. As I said, there was a possibility that you could do many different things. I remember walking into the orchestral conductor's class and said, "Can I audit your class?" And he was like, "Sure." So at those days, we would conduct to records. We didn't have an orchestra at hand, but he did ask if we wanted to take time in a rehearsal to actually conduct the orchestra. And I jumped at the chance. Nobody else volunteered. I was like, yes. And it was Beethoven's 8th Symphony. So I went in there with my little mini score. I had to memorize it because you can't read it. As you know, you can't read that. And conducted the first movement. And I remember all of the instrumental colleagues of mine were just stunned that there's a singer standing on the podium conducting their orchestra. And I would say, "Bassoon, you came in late. It's actually early," and all these kinds of things. And it measures, they were kind of shocked. But when I went to USC, which is where I went to grad school, you really did have to choose. And so I chose voice, in part because my piano skills were very, very poor. And in order to really become a conductor, you have to be able to read enough at the keyboard so that you can play scores. And I remember one of the tests was, "Here's an orchestral score, play it." And I was just like, yeah, no, that's beyond my ability. So you and I ended up sharing the same voice teacher because I was there when you were there, started in 1981.
You know, what's funny is I went to USC to become a singer and then became a conductor. You went to become a conductor and became a singer.
Well, Charles told me I had to choose. So ultimately I chose conducting. I mean, I chose singing, even though I was a student conductor, and I actually led rehearsals of the Carmina Burana, which he came to Eastern Michigan University as the soloist. And so that's how I met him. I was conducting a rehearsal and he was like, "Oh, let's have a lesson." So I went and had a lesson with him, and he says, "Well, when you come to USC, study with me." And I was like, "Okay." So
Fantastic.
yeah.
And from there, you went on to San Francisco Opera.
I did. I had a little side trip at the Music Academy of the West and got to work with some wonderful teachers there, including Martial Sanguer. There were 3 weeks in a row. There were 3 baritones that came in: Giorgio Tozzi, followed by Martial Sanguer, followed by Cheryl Milnes, and each of them. And I was in heaven. Oh my goodness, how great is this? Ended up studying with Martial Sanguer for a number of years before I ended up in the San Francisco Opera Chorus.
Yeah.
As a tenor.
Right. Well, it's it's
second tenor.
It's a fine line, and things change. Charles Rowe, as you know, started his career as a tenor and switched to baritone, and it's not that unusual. It's not like you're one or the other. You've qualities.
Right. Well, so that's where I ended up in San Francisco for a couple of years, and then lost the job there, got let go. There was a lot of reorganization going on with the unions, and they were kind of concerned about having too many unionized singers. So in the interim, I fell in love again and moved to the Boston area. Studied with Richard Casserly at Boston University for a number of years, trying to become a Helden tenor.
Well, so, this I think will be interesting to our audience here, that the reason, but people sometimes ask him, "Paul, how do you get the choir to sound so good?" and I usually say, they sing really well. You know, Dawn has very specialized training and is one of our best singers and has been for a long time. But a number of people in the chorus have trained extensively as soloists, and thank goodness. One of my first memories in Ashland is going to a recital you gave at the Methodist Church. And I forget even how I heard about you, but I heard about you,
Yeah.
and I went, and I don't think I even knew the whole story. I just knew there was a man giving a classical recital, so I'm going to that. And then met you, and of course, then we found all these common interests, and you've been a mainstay ever since.
I remember when I called you, because I had actually spoken to Clancy Roan. I had met her because I'd met Fred Roan. I was doing something with the radio station at the time where I was doing a weekly show that had an arts segment. So I went to their chamber music um, week that they did, where they had chamber music. They had amateurs get together and play chamber music. And at one point, I I met you, and I couldn't remember. This is so embarrassing. Been to so many different schools and summer camps and various stuff, and I knew that I knew you, but I didn't know from where. And so I asked Clancy, that's Paul French, and I remembered the name. So I called you and asked if I could audition for the Repertory Singers, and I'll never forget this because you said, you don't even have to audition, you can just come to the rehearsal. And I said, but you haven't heard me sing. And they said, well, you're better now, right?
We have a master's in voice from one of the big conservatory schools in the country.
Yeah,
that was a that was a no-brainer.
yeah. But I remember being so impressed when I joined the choir, because I thought, oh, it's a small town, and I sang in Boston with the Boston Camerata. I sang with different organizations. I always kept choral singing going, even when I was studying solo, church choir, all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, it'll be lovely to be in an amateur choir. Maybe I'll be one of the ringers. And I came to the first rehearsal, and I was amazed at the quality of singers that were in there, because we had teachers, voice teachers, and Russ Oddie, who taught at the high school, and Allison Glatley, who had toured with Roger Wagner. I mean, these are the guys that I sang with in the bass section, and I was kind of like, I've hit pay. I mean, this is as good as any choir I've ever sung in, and it's in this small town. How did that happen? And
Yeah.
I think part of how it happened is, and I'm just going to throw this at you, because you really, you set a high bar for what you expect the singers to do, to bring to the organization, to contributing their talent in terms of what they can do vocally, but also what they can do mentally and what they can do artistically. So oftentimes I think about this in my solo work. How would I phrase this if Paul was conducting it? I literally would write, okay, this is an unaccented syllable, so don't sock it. This is the word various things that we've worked on before. And I was aware of them previously, but just in the experience that I've had with working with you for many, many years, that it has this sense of really being able to create not just a good vocal sound, but an artistic sound within each section and then within the choir. And that just comes with basically being aware of the notes and the words and the harmony all at the same time, which is kind of an amazing thing when you think about it, and something that, like so many of us who are at home on the Zoom meetings, missing terribly, this idea of just getting together with like-minded and like-spirited people and singing great music like Bach and Brahms and Britten and all that stuff that we were just missing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's kind of you to say. I do think conductors that were singers themselves have an advantage if you stop and think about what you really need to do and then say it clearly. Singers are fantastic, and nobody works harder for the common good than people in a choir. Well, I should focus us towards the clip that we're going to feature with this interview, which is you singing the solo in I Saw a Stranger from Jody's Songs for the Journey for a couple of years ago. So I think she wrote that for you, and she thought about your voice. I mean, this talk about being privileged to have a composer writing not just for the group, but for the soloists. And she went so far as to put the vowels that she wanted you to sing high on music, on all the high Ds. It was always on an oo vowel where you have this sweet, dolce sound. To have that written for you, that must feel pretty special.
It was quite overwhelming, having grown up with music history and obviously my job on the radio. I read about people like Mozart who wrote specific roles, specific arias for specific singers that he was working on. When he wrote Marriage of Figaro, he had specific singer in mind to do the role of Figaro. And my favorite story is when he wrote Don Giovanni, the first time he had a specific singer and they sang the aria Il mio tesoro. Then it moved to Vienna and it was a different singer. And he says, I don't think I can sing that. And so Mozart went home and wrote Dalla sua pace and came back and said, well, how about this one? And it was just like, and so to have that happen to me as a performer is kind of special. I mean, yeah, I was so moved and touched and also a little bit worried, frankly, because it was for me and I didn't want to disappoint.
Well, you did not, as people will hear in a moment. So I wanted to, talk to you and to feature you, and this piece came to mind. But I think during the dark days that we're in, the whole message of this piece, to take care of the stranger, to look out for one another, is what we all need to be doing all the time. But especially right now when people are really struggling and people are losing their jobs and businesses are going under. Just drive down Main Street of town, and we need to stay together and to work hard. And let me just say again to those of you listening now, we so appreciate people are continuing to send donations in to support the group. And we are very privileged to have you on our team. And Don, I forget how long we've been working together, but a long time. And
1998.
1998.
Yeah.
Well, and it's been fantastic. You have such a big heart, and you love music, and you are such an important part of why Repertory Singers has done well. So please enjoy Dawn and the group singing this beautiful piece, written, this solo movement, written especially for Dawn. And have a good Thanksgiving, Dawn.
Thank you, and Thanksgiving to you too, and to everyone who's listening. And we will be together soon.
Amen. All right, thank you.
Thanks.